We are going to talk about the role of the local school board in 21st century American K-12 education as we take part in a global economy and whether this is the best way to run our education system. Increasing number of people have doubts or misgivings. Literally yesterday, somebody sent me an article from the latest Wilson Quarterly by Tom Talk, who had founded Education Sector, a Washington-based education reform think group. And Tom's article, entitled Who Rules?, raises a number of questions about school boards, and I'm going to take the liberty of opening this with one paragraph from Tom's new article, which I recommend all of you have a look at. He writes, "Amid the challenges of the 21st century, the local school board looks less like a democratic utopia and more like a bastion of leadership dyspepsia. In many districts, constant infighting slows reforms and contributes to the notoriously rapid turnover among the school superintendents who must lead the way toward change. More than 95% of the nation's school board members are elected to office, but balloting rarely draws more than 20% of eligible voters, leaving the elections vulnerable to single-issue candidates and special interests. While school board seats once attracted civic leaders, today more than 1 in 6 school board members are past or present teacher union members. Others are single-minded advocates of pet causes, from varsity sports to creationism. Conflicts of interest are also a problem. Maeroff reports, that's this Maeroff, that a number of the jobs in a New Jersey school system on whose board he served were occupied by the spouses and children of other board members," unquote. We are going to give each of the 3 panelists not more than 7 minutes for opening remarks. We're going to go in the order from Ann to Jean to Joel. And then I'm going to ask them a few boring questions, and then we're going to open this up for audience participation. That means all of you. So without further ado, take it away, Ann Bryant.
Well, thank you, Checker. And it's a privilege to be on this panel with this august group. And as you can probably guess, Checker and now Tom Talk are people I disagree with about 100% of the time. No, 90% of the time. Actually, you might be interested to know that the Fordham Institute and the Iowa Association of School Boards and the National School Boards Association teamed up together to produce Governance in the Accountability Era, every decade study of school boards, and I highly recommend it. It's a great piece of work, and there were 71 questions asked of school boards and superintendents, and Checker and I agreed on at least 2 or 3 of them. But this topic, it won't surprise you to know, I come to this with a passion for school boards, whether they are elected or appointed, and I want to tell you why. Every person here knows that state and local funding is what drives most of our schools, all of our schools. Very little comes from the federal government. And so schools are literally of our communities. They are owned by our community members. And so the school board represents that community, and there are often differences of opinion in communities, and so about the nature of public education. And so who better than the owners, the representatives of that community, to debate those issues? But the role of the school board has really evolved, and I am pleased to say in the last decade and a half, it has become, for the most part, it has become a group of people who are focused on student achievement, whose primary job is to set the vision and the goals for the district, whose next job is to say, how do we reach those goals? What's the accountability system? And how do we spend the resources available to us in the most effective manners? Now, are we perfect? Absolutely not. But I would measure a lot of school boards against our current Congress and say that dysfunction, that name is Congress. So I think we've got to take into account what the issues are at the local level. Creating shared vision, as I said, is part of their goal. And again, the accountability system has to focus on policy and not administration. And these are sometimes tough issues. Granted, when a school board member goes to the grocery store, it takes an hour to get out because everyone thinks they know how to run the school. Everyone wants to go to the school board member and say, fix X. And as we teach, the answer is, let me look into it and get the superintendent to get back to you. So we'll just leave it to you, Joel. This study on school boards in the accountability era looks at who school board members are. And I just want to give you a couple of data points. 62% are not paid, they're volunteer citizens. 23% get a small stipend for things like childcare and transportation. School board members are representatives of their communities, albeit their education level is better than the national average. They have higher incomes, and they are more racially diverse than other legislative bodies. We also surveyed school boards about their beliefs. And again, I think those beliefs is something we might talk about in this panel. School boards believe that the most urgent issue facing public education, yes, is funding, but importantly, close to that is improving student learning across the board, and they are greatly concerned about the achievement gap. School board members take a larger view of the role of schooling, and board members and superintendents are in almost total agreement on a lot of these areas. So it's not a board versus superintendent issue. They say that helping students fulfill their potential and preparing students for a satisfying and productive life are the two ultimate ends. They talk about the more narrow objective of preparing students for college and the workforce. They see that as important, but they look at it in the bigger context. Actually, I'll quote Governor Bush, who said this morning in his remarks, the goal of education is to create lives of purpose, lives of meaning, to pursue their dreams. So even Governor Bush is not looking just at workforce and career and college readiness. School boards are very aware of the realities facing public education. A majority said the current level of student achievement is unacceptable. They are committed to making dramatic change. They also will make those changes based on good research. At the same time, 87% also defined success in these broader terms and do not think, and this is one of the issues that I would take a little issue with Governor Bush this morning, good tests should drive teaching and learning. Bad tests should not. And we currently have in many states tests that are literally creating those wonderful examples he talked about. So good tests and the Common Core is something we believe in, and the good assessments are certainly a driver. School board members do not believe in silver bullets. It won't surprise you to know that they and superintendents do not believe in quick fixes, which they think some charter schools are. Hiring non-traditional teachers might get you results, might not. They want research when they drive a reform agenda. Many of you know the Credo study from 2009, where 17% of charters outperform traditional public schools, 37% underperform traditional public schools. So school boards will, in fact, they are the largest authorizer of charter schools, school boards are. They want to learn from the successes of charter schools, and they want to close the ones that are not successful. So we are not against charter schools by any means, but we want the research to prove out, and we want good charter schools. Increasingly, school boards know that professional development, using data to drive decisions, improving the quality of school and district leadership, are some of the strategies that we know work based on the research. There's a lot of alignment between superintendents and school boards in this report. And a lot of it is around the strategies that I think you might agree work. So a couple of examples. And the latest winner of the Malcolm Baldrige Award, which is one of the most prestigious business awards in this nation, is Montgomery County Schools in Maryland. Actually an 11-year journey where the school board and the superintendent work together. That's the kind of reform that lasts, and I can give you examples in Baltimore City. I can give you examples from Boston, Massachusetts, from, I'm going fast here,
last minute.
Yep, Cincinnati, Ohio, where a dramatic set of reforms took place. And again, these changes took the courage of a superintendent and a school board that hung in there together. Because sometimes these changes cause angst among parents. When you have to remove a principal because it's a low-performing school and that principal had every opportunity, sometimes the parents aren't happy because they like the person. This is when we need the strong school board superintendent team, and I am committed to answering the questions that challenge such a governance structure.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ann. Gene Maeroff.
These are not the greatest days for school boards. In Houston last month, the board president defended the awarding of contracts to friends and relatives of board members. In Elizabeth, New Jersey last month, the board president was arrested for allowing her daughter to participate in the free school lunch program of the federal government for which she was not eligible. Does this mean that Texas and New Jersey should abolish school boards? I think not. I see little evidence that without school boards, there would be higher achievement for students. There's just not evidence to that extent as school boards are now constituted. Two major issues are reflected, though, in both of these incidents. Who should serve on school boards, and how should they attain their position? These are not the only issues involving school boards. A separate group of issues revolves around the considerations of the role and responsibility of board members. Beginning in late 2007 and continuing into 2010, I studied school boards around the country for my latest book, School Boards in America.
Available today.
The concerns that it aroused gave birth to the subtitle of the book, A Flawed Exercise in Democracy. The democratic aspect underlying the existence of school boards has much to do with my reluctance to give up on school boards. Self-government serves democracy, and school boards are about democracy and about self-government. They are meant to ensure that the public schools will act in the service of the people. They are, in the smallest districts, as close to the grassroots as we could get without burying ourselves in the soil of our democracy. Is this an ideal notion? Of course it is. But so are the three pillars of democracy that provide checks and balances. So are the elected bodies that preside at the state and county and local levels. School boards, though, may not be essential to the operation of public schools. This much I'll grant. The evidence suggests that school systems can operate without school boards. And mayoral control of the sort in New York City, which my panel colleague Joel Klein will discuss, demonstrates that school boards are not a sine qua non of a school system. But let me return to my original proposition, namely the difficulties created by some who gain seats on school boards. Don't get me wrong, there are thousands of exemplary members of school boards. Some, though, have no business on those bodies. They are troublesome in various ways. They may be lazy, uninterested, on boards for the wrong reasons, meddlesome, or unable and or unwilling to collaborate with colleagues. Some may micromanage, and some may use their positions to advance the job prospects of candidates. I write in my book about school boards in Georgia, North Carolina, and Louisiana that have been embarrassments to anyone who wants to defend school boards as an essential institution. Having such people on school boards serves no useful purpose and may, in fact, impede and undermine the efforts of well-meaning members, not to mention the work of the superintendent and his or her staff. The members of more than 90% of school boards are elected. Elections lie at the heart of the democratic process, but they may not promote the best of outcomes for school boards. And again, this is a flaw of democracy. The outcomes of school board elections can be easily manipulated. At least 1/3 of board elections occur at times when no other elections take place, supposedly insulating these elections from partisan politics. Yet, a turnout of 10 to 12% of the voters is typical in many districts. How much democracy is there when 90% of the eligible voters eschew the polls? Moreover, teacher unions, asserting their democratic prerogative, can strongly influence the results of these elections. What about the almost 10% of appointed school boards? Are they more responsive to the public? Do their members perform more ably? There just is not enough evidence to be able to speak definitively about this. I concluded after my investigation that it might be worth conducting an experiment that calls for more appointed school boards and or hybrid boards that are made up partially of elected people, partially of appointed ones. And I urge the policymakers among you to consider pilot projects of this sort. And I hope you will fashion, in doing so, a system that ensures integrity in the appointive process. The appointment is no better than the manner by which it occurs.
Gene, thank you very much. Joel Klein.
Thank you, Checker. And let me just say, it's obviously a very idealized and wonderful notion to say we should have these school boards and they should, it's a democratic thing and all of that. So I start with to me, a practical concern. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked for our kids in America. I haven't seen an example where people are sort of saying, this kind of governance has led us to a situation where everybody admits, including the school board, that the thing is broken, and yet it continues to break. The average superintendent in America serves about 2.5 to 3 years, which is not time enough to get anything of real consequence done. There is a reason that happens, and that happens in no small measure because school boards are extraordinarily small-bore political institutions. Now, our founding fathers figured out that democracy is a great way to run a country, but they figured it out that it was representative, not participatory democracy. Why don't we have a police board to run the police department? Safety is surely critical to every community in which people live. Why don't we have a fire board to run the fire department, a health board to run the health department, and an economic development board to run the economic development department? No, we let mayors usually be responsible for those functions, and there's a reason. The mayor is accountable to the entire elected organization, the people who put him or her in office. It is the person in the city that's going to be budgetarily responsible. It's the person with the loudest bullhorn. It's the person with the most accountability in the system. By contrast, as Gene has pointed out, school boards tend to be people who get elected. In my city, they got elected by 4, 5, 3% votes. They never held the elections, and they had some 32 of them. They never held the elections when anybody showed up except those people who are well organized. You want to understand the dynamics of school boards, don't just read Gene's book, but also read Terry Moe's book called Special Interest. You'll understand the realpolitik. And if people don't think this is about realpolitik, and that for school boards, oftentimes, small bore issues are dominant, talk to any superintendent. It may be in a survey, but I was a sup for a decade, and I know lots of sups that I hung out with. And after a half a glass of wine, I'd ask them, and they would say, "Are you kidding me? You know how much time it takes away from my job, dealing with all of the small issues." When I started, we have an appointed board. The mayor's got most of the people on that board. We have an appointed board. 5 of the people were borough president representatives. The first meeting I went to, one of the borough president representatives who had been on a local school board came up to me and honest to God said, "You know, you guys have a lot of legal business. My son-in-law is a practicing lawyer. I sure would like to cooperate in your agenda, and here's his card." Now, I'm not the most obtuse human being. I got the message. But this is what school board politics and the realpolitik. The people in New York who were running for city council started on the school board, did their time. What was their agenda? To move up. The truth of the matter is we need to move toward a governance system that holds our highest officials, and in cities, those are mayors, our highest officials accountable for the performance of the schools, just like we do for the safety of the city, just like we do for the economic development of the city. Last point, just a practical point. If you study the last decade in America and look around, it's not unique, but look around to cities that people talk about where big things were happening. DC, New York, Boston, Chicago. These are not the only ones, and not everything that happened in those cities are perfect. But those were places that were fueled by mayoral control and a mayor who was willing to step out. Take a close look at what Rahm Emanuel is going to be doing in Chicago. You would not be doing those kind of things in a school board environment. So I am where I began. The evidence is in. The evidence is clear. A school board model of governance has not worked for America. The urgency that we need to transform K-12 education is going to take great leadership, not more meetings.
Thank you all very much.
I'm glad Joel doesn't have any feelings about this issue.
I've got lots of
I should
questions,
just say,
but I
I
thought
love Ann Bryant.
I like Ann too, and I thought she might want a brief response.
I just a couple of corrections. The 2.5 superintendent lifespan is inaccurate. It's not good enough in urban centers, but in the study that the Council of Urban Boards of Education did of its members, which is 110 of the top districts, it's 4 years. So not better, but a lot of superintendents. And the example I gave in Montgomery County is a good one, 11 years. And then Jerry Weiss retired. So it is not the norm that it's 2.5 years. The second point is that he named 4 cities that have made dramatic progress. And in Boston and Chicago, there is an appointed board. We are not against appointed boards, and I think your hybrid is an interesting concept. But the fact is, in Boston, there's a nominating committee of citizens, and that nominating committee puts a slate of candidates before Mayor Menino. Mayor Menino can put as many people on that slate as he wants, but there is a community organization that vets those school board members. And I will tell you, when you talk to Tom Bazant, now maybe I talked to him before the glass of wine, but he talks about the role of the Boston School Committee and the important role they've played. So don't underestimate the power of having strong citizens working with the superintendent to make reform.
So help me a little bit with this, Ann, because I don't have a view about appointed school boards. There are a number of different models of that in different places. There are even some hybrids with the mayor and the governor having to get together and decide who's going to be on the school board, as in Baltimore and I believe Philadelphia. What does the school board do exactly when it's an appointed body between, let's say, the mayor and the superintendent? Does it have power? Who's in charge here?
Well, it varies on those two city examples, but and sometimes the superintendent reports to the mayor in those situations, and sometimes he or she reports to the board. The point is, there are community citizens working with the superintendent to drive some of these change issues. The examples that Jean gave of the bad behaving board members, well, I have to tell you, I can give you equal number of examples of state legislators and members of Congress. So, we aren't perfect. But I think the whole point is the community needs to see, and I think, Joel, your examples of the local school boards in New York, granted, but that's more of a parent council kind of board. It's not the Board of Education of the city. And I think we have to focus on what are the driving reforms we need in public education. That's the issue we've got to be addressing. That's the purpose of this conference, is what can we do to increase student achievement and lower achievement gaps. And those strategies are not easy fixes, and you need the community behind you, whether it's a bond referendum or whether it is you need the community to support the changes. That's where school boards can be your best ally.
Well, I'm shocked that you would impugn the United States Congress as being less than perfect in the year 2011. I thought they were getting everything right.
We can't be having a serious discussion if we say school boards are not as bad as the U.S. Congress. I mean, surely we're going to set the standard a little higher than that.
It's a low bar. It's a low bar. I want to lift this one notch higher, though, and go to a structural question, and leave the board aside for just a minute. Let's talk about what do we mean by local control in 2011 in American public education. Jean's state of New Jersey has 600 or so districts with 2,400 or so schools. That's an average of 4 schools per district. Your district, Joel, is 1,000 schools and 1 million kids, ballpark?
1,700 schools and 1,000,001.
1,700 schools and 1,000,001. Are these both versions of local control? Is it possible that New Jersey has too much of it and New York doesn't have enough of it? What do we mean by local control these days in America? Anybody?
Well, I would say that local control has to be at a level in which it really exists. And in New York, they tried with decentralization and the election of school boards that presided over the elementary and middle schools in the beginning in 1970. And it's true, the turnout was even worse than Joel Klein said. It was 2 to 3% at that time. It was just terrible. And the elections were controlled by the teacher union and the Home and School Society of the Catholic Schools, which were looking for Title I money and transportation. And so I don't know how much local control there was. New Jersey probably has too much. I think that there are too many small districts, and there has been somewhat of an effort to try to encourage consolidation. And consolidation in the states requires courageous legislators, because no matter what size a school district is, it could be 57 students, there are going to be people who will fight against consolidating with a nearby district. So if legislators are worried about getting reelected more than they are about trying to help education by creating a size that really has a meaningful level, then it's not going to happen. I think there can be local control. How much there could be in big cities like Chicago and Boston and New York is questionable, and probably those are the places for mayoral control. But mayoral control is impractical at the thousands and thousands of school districts we have that are under 2,500. It's impractical in places that are regional districts that serve more than one geopolitical unit. So there is room for school boards, and there can be different kinds of governing structures depending on the size of the unit, in my opinion.
Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, just one comment. The Common Core standards that you're all familiar with are something that the National School Boards Association is very much behind. So raising the level of Common Core standards and the assessments is not antithetical to local control, in our opinion. But you want to have boards at the local level with superintendents having the flexibility to name the curriculum, to name the kind of learning that takes place. For example, the KIPP Academy can be a wonderful solution for a certain group of kids. But teaching creativity and innovation and imagination, which is not exactly what that curriculum is all about, is something for other kids. So you need the flexibility at the local level that is going to drive the kind of innovation and the 21st century learning that we are all advocating for.
You did say creativity, not creationism, didn't you?
I did
Yes,
say,
I thought so.
I did say creativity.
I understand why this made sense in the 19th century when people stayed in their town and grew up there and lived there and worked there. People move all over the place now, within their state, beyond their state. Kids are getting courses from the other side of the country virtually now. I've sort of lost the rationale for these municipally defined town-level school districts, as in New Jersey's 600. They're creatures of the state, aren't they, in nearly every state? That is to say, I don't think they're in the Constitution in more than a few states. They're things the legislature basically created and could do something different with. Joel, didn't the legislature, wasn't that the body in New York State that decided that the mayor should be in charge?
Yep.
Yeah.
And obviously they can. That's the body in D.C., the city council, which decided that the mayor should be in charge. It's a body in most states that can do this. But again, people have to understand about politics and education. Education is about the exercise of power. The people who have the status quo want to diffuse power so that they can ensure that they'll be able to protect a status quo that serves their needs. School boards are a convenient way to do that. And so when you read Terry Moe's book, it's not by happenstance that there were 2 or 3% who showed up, and I can identify who those people were in New York City in the 32 school districts. It was by intentional design. And therefore, in an election which 2 or 3 people, boots on the ground and financial resources are outcome determinative. So we have to understand the power dynamics. And my submission is that a mayor who's at least responsible to the whole city and who can align budgetary priorities is much more likely to take the bold and kind of challenging steps we need. And let me give you one example, because Ann mentioned KIPP. And in my view, KIPP has been an enormously valuable contribution. Nobody thinks it's the only model, and nobody thinks it ought to have a monopoly. But I want to know about how many school boards have been out there saying, come to my district with charter schools in order to create more options for families in my districts. Most school boards that I knew wanted to perpetuate the monopoly. And where you saw people inviting charters in were much more likely to be in places like D.C. and New York, where we were able to go out because the mayor was able to fade some of the heat. So I think it's engaging and endearing to think that representative democracy, that grassroots democracy is the best solution. But in fact, it doesn't work that way, and we're certainly satisfied. I don't see why this is such a great idea. We don't have the police departments run by a board that could decide all of the policies for a police department.
Brief pause on Kip. I don't see her at the moment, but I believe in the room is Doris Fisher, Mrs. Donald Fisher, who, with her late husband, put Kip on the map, actually, from 2 schools in Houston and the Bronx into what it is today. And they deserve quite a vote of thanks, I think, for this accomplishment.
Again, Joel, I just want to respond that those are your opinions, but the research and the data that I've got behind surveying thousands of school board members say they are not willing to have the status quo continue. They want change. They want reform. They just want to base it on good practice.
Where are the school boards in that are inviting charters in so families can have more choice?
School boards are the largest authorizers of charter schools today.
But that's factually true, but in the cities where I know, the school boards are reluctant authorizers.
They want to authorize a good charter application. They want to do it to ensure that the students who go to that charter school are going to get a great education. There are some charter plans that are not appropriate, are not adequate. And so a school board might say, no, go back and try again. Just because something is a good idea is not the reason to adopt it. There should be basis of research, there should be good practice behind it. That's what a school board wants. It's not an experiment with kids' lives.
About the existing schools, we're experimenting with kids' lives with the schools that are existing right today. And why don't they apply the same criteria and say any existing school that isn't meeting rigorous standards will shut down? I haven't seen school boards take leadership on that.
Okay, stop.
Okay,
This is not an applause meter event.
Right. And so, Joel, as a school board person, and you might want to speak to this, Jean, closing a school is a tough decision. School boards do it all the time, and they get a lot of heat when those parents don't want their school shut down. These are tough issues. That's why school board meetings can be contentious, because the values within a community get put in front of that community. There is no more rabid person than a parent of a child, thank heaven, because parenting is the most important thing most of us do in our lives. And there are belief systems among every single parent that may differ. So having a place where you can air those views, make the tough decisions, is what school boarding is all about.
So, Gene, is that what your school board is like?
Well, our school board, before I got on it, and a colleague 4 years ago, was pretty much controlled by an inside group that was allied with the teacher union. And we got on saying that it's not who you know, but what you know that should determine who gets hired in the district.
Were you part of a sort of a slate?
We were an insurgent slate, that's
Okay.
right. There were 3 of us for a 9-member board. 2 of us won, and the third one finished 4th. She almost won, and then she won 2 years later. And then we backed other candidates, and we now control, as reformers, 7 of the 9 seats on the school board, and we have control now of the negotiation with the teacher union.
What do we do in the next election in terms of economic development in the city? What do we do in the next election in terms of safety in the city and the policies that the mayor is going to follow? We manage in a representative democracy to survive transitions. And look, mayoral control is by no means a panacea. A poor mayor or a mayor who's not prepared to lead the city is certainly not going to be any better. But we seem to manage a city by having successful successor mayoral elections. And let me just say about school boards, closing schools is very hard, but I just think we ought to require anyone who runs for a school board to make the following commitment: that they are prepared to have their child randomly assigned to schools in that school district, or else they will close those schools to which they won't send their own child. Because we have a group of schools in America. We have a group of schools. I learned this in New York, and I've never been in an audience ever in a major city when anyone's ever raised their hand. I said, would you randomly send your kid to a school in this school district. I've never had anyone do that. But we have a group of schools in America which I call OPC schools. And those are schools for other people's children. And it's long past due that we have those schools. So I would like to see a school board come out. I issue this challenge and support parent trigger, where if it's hard to close down schools, empower parents to close down schools and to replace them. I haven't seen a school board in America support that. Ben Austin is here. What he's doing in California and what's going to catch on in the country is going to be very, very powerful. And what better grassroots democracy, if you believe in it, than saying, we the parents who have our kids in PS 19, we would like to close that down and replace it with KIPP. When school boards start calling for that, that'll reinvigorize my enthusiasm for participation.
Joel, I'm not sure everyone in the room knows what parent trigger is. Do you want to say?
Parent trigger is basically a California law that Ben and others led the charge on, in which if 50+% of the parents want to close down a school and replace it, they can do that. And there's an example where, again, people get engaged at a level in which they want real change for their children. These people are not running for anything, but they want real change for their children. And that seems to me, again, I would welcome school boards that say, this is a good way to bring a check on our own power.
What
I don't see is people bringing checks on their own power.
It's another form of local control at the micro level, isn't it, at the building level? And aren't charter schools another form of local control at the building level? I wanted to push back on charter schools for just 1 second, one question, Ann, because I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, and your tribute to Jerry Wiest and his accomplishments at the district level is legitimate. But Montgomery County, Maryland has turned down every single charter application that has ever been brought to it in the history of charters.
All I can tell you is Montgomery County is one of the most successful school districts in the nation. They have lowered the achievement gaps. They've just won the Malcolm Baldrige, which is a very, very rigorous process of assessment. If that board made that decision, then I would go back and look at the research they based it on, and I would say they probably made a good decision.
I hear you. Just out of curiosity, besides Jean, are there other current school board members in the room? One, two, at least a couple. We're going to get to audience questions in just a couple minutes, and I think it'd be great if you all had some on your mind. I want to go to this other sort of governance question that we talked about, but not quite, though Joel alluded to it when he talked about having a police board. Why these days is public education separate from general purpose government at the municipal level or the state level?
Well, one of the reasons, and you wrote about it yourself in that recent article you did, was because it evolved out of the 19th century when the citizens in New England towns felt that the provision of public education, not looking after the environment, not installing sewers, but the provision of public education was the most important thing that they could do. And they formed themselves into school committees, large school committees, because these citizens did almost everything, including hiring the teachers, putting wood in the stoves, everything. So it came from a philosophy that this was just about the most important thing that citizens could do at the local level.
But does it still make sense? I understand the 19th century origins, but in 2011, should public education be organizationally and structurally and governmentally different from the police department, the fire department, the economic development department, the health department, the welfare department, the corrections department, and so forth?
And I would say that today it's even more important than it was in the 19th century. Education and the education of our young people, first of all, it is often the biggest business in a district. So it's a lot bigger than fire department, police department, health department. And it's the most fundamental thing we do as a nation. So absolutely, it is as relevant today as it was in the 19th century. And I would also say that the city councils often are oversight of those departments as well as mayors, but in many cases it's the city council or the county council that oversees those functions. So I think it's more important today than it was in the 19th century.
Okay. One more question from me, then I want to ask the audience a couple questions, then let's have questions from the audience. A frequently suggested reform of the current school board structure is to move the election dates around to coincide with the general purpose election when presidents and governors and so on get elected. School board elections, that is. Instead of being in, May 4th, they'd become the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November in even-numbered years. Is this, first of all, how much of that occurs today? Gene, you probably know that. And secondly, is this a significant reform that we should be trying to make? Or is it a kind of a palliative that doesn't solve anything really?
Well, probably from my research, at least a third of the elections for school boards take place when no other elections take place.
When no other elections
No
take
other
place,
elections,
yeah.
For example, in New Jersey in April when nothing else is taking place. The idea, as I said before, is to insulate it from politics. On the other hand, I looked at this carefully and I can't decide, frankly, whether we'd be better off to hold the election when other elections occur. I do think it would probably get caught up in more partisan politics, although in places like Connecticut, people do run for school board as Republicans or Democrats already. You would have a lot of people voting on the school board members and on the money issues who really don't have too much interest in the schools. I don't know if that's good or bad. They certainly have a right to vote. So I think it's kind of a wash whether you have it at a separate time or not. I can't really decide that myself.
Ann, do you have a thought on this?
I agree with Gene, but I do think we need to make far more effort in getting greater turnout, whether it's in the spring or in the fall. I mean, we do a lot to try and educate the public around engagement, and the school board election is critical. There are too many places where school board members are getting elected by a very, very slim margin. So, I think what we have to do as a nation is get more interest in school board elections, get it further out in the public, have people with their credentials before the public, whether it's local cable television, whether it's town hall meetings. We need more engagement of our communities in the school board elections.
Joel, is this deck chairs on the Titanic, or is this a reform that states should seriously contemplate?
It's a little like chicken soup, it can't hurt.
It can't hurt. You don't see it as a fundamental solution, however?
No.
Okay. If I were better organized, I would have some questions for your clickers, but I didn't, so let's just have a show of hands on a couple of questions. How many of the people in the room have serious misgivings about the current structure and governance of public education in America?
That's why they're here.
That's why they're here, okay. How many of the people in the room think that the local school board as an institution is something fundamentally to be preserved in some form in the future?
It's a pretty good show.
Well, I'd say it's a pretty paltry show, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, but you have to consider the audience.
These are education reform-minded, public-spirited people. And if no more than, it looked to me like maximum 20% of the people in the room raise their hands on that one, I think this is noteworthy. So we are going to turn to the audience. There's mics up front, and there's a line needing to be formed, and you... We're not going to get to more than 40 or 50 questions before the time to end this session. I'd like you to introduce yourself. I'd like you to make it a question and not a statement or speech, and I'd like you to keep it brief. And I happen to know the first two questioners, but Paul, introduce yourself.
I'm Paul Peterson. I
Lift up the mic a little. They can hear you better.
I'm the director of the program on education policy and governance at Harvard University. So I would like the panel to think about whether or not it's conceivable that we could get rid of the school boards. I'm quite convinced that they have little place at a time when over half the money comes from higher tiers of government, and they're just handing out other people's money instead of the money they have to explain to their own taxpayers. So I can see a case for getting rid of them, but I don't see how it's possible. It's just too deeply entrenched in American society. So why not instead focus on giving choices to the students in the community? And the best new idea out there is to let everybody in the high school to have a choice of taking a course online or a course from the local school district. So why not use this as the avenue to spur school boards to take more seriously the responsibility of educating the children?
So I think there's really two questions there. One has to do with we'll call it the political feasibility of getting rid of local school boards, and the other is about choice as an alternative reform strategy.
Let me just give a quick example, and I'm going to summarize it. New Brunswick, Canada, legislature got on board and eradicated the school board. They had a minister of finance. 5 years later, the community was so disgruntled, mad, furious at the heavy-handed nature of that minister of education that they reinstated a school board with more power than before. So if you talk about eradicating school boards, be careful what you ask for, because in that instance, in Canada, they gave them more power. On the second part of the question, I think that's a great idea. I think we need to give students more choices, and I think NSBA has been a leader in driving technology integration into public education, and the more we can use technology well to give students choices, the better off we'll be.
Gene?
I don't think school boards are going away. In most states, if not all, just about, it would take acts of the legislature to make this happen. The legislatures would never do this because they'd be under such pressure from localities and from the voters that the legislatures don't even have enough courage in most places to push consolidation of school districts. And you have all these little school districts, and legislatures won't act to do that. So they're certainly not going to abolish school districts. As far as other people's money, I'm president of a school board that spends $205 million a year. 93% comes from our local taxpayers. So it's not other people's money, it's the taxpayers' money, and we try to look out for it pretty well. I'm all for online courses for students in high school. I'm all for them being able to take courses on college campuses, and I don't think that school districts do enough of that.
Joel, thoughts on this one? Not everybody has to.
I believe it's a product of leadership. It's not by happenstance that New York, Chicago, D.C., and others. And again, I take Ann's point that it doesn't mean every time this happens it'll be a good thing or that the citizenry will be happy. I don't see a mass movement, but I think you're going to see increasingly Americans are going to realize that the current educational system is simply not serving the needs of our nation in a big-time way. It's not just the achievement gaps. It's the whole question of whether we're educating our kids to a 21st century economy that's entirely different from the ones we grew up in. That's going to bring pressure on system. And second of all, I agree with Paul, choice, this is why I keep raising it about other people's schools and about where are the school boards that are aggressively bringing in the good charter schools to create choice rather than simply sitting back being passive authorizers. And to me, choice is a very powerful thing. Most school boards I know resist choice. They like the monopoly, other people, children's school model. That's precisely why we have it.
Thank you very much. Jerry?
Jerry Hume, the Jackman Hume Foundation. I'd like the panel to address the subject of whether or not the federal government, whose allocation to the schools have gone from 7% to 11% of a $600 billion budget over the last 20 years, should be block grants and come without strings attached. Because those strings wag the tail of the dog. I've seen it.
Okay, another governance question, the federal bucks.
Totally agree. I think the federal government has taken on very, very micromanagement tactics. There are reasons for that. I am a big fan of Secretary Duncan, so we've had these discussions, but I think Title I and IDEA monies were intended to go to poor kids and kids with special needs. And that should be up to the district on how to use that in the most effective way.
Gene or Joel on this one?
Well, in 1965, when
You were a lad.
When Elementary and Secondary Education Act was being considered, there was a big battle over whether or not that should be block grants or it should be specific, as Title I is. And the idea of Title I was to supplement, not to supplant, local funds. And while I think there are lots of problems with the money coming from states and from the federal government in terms of unfunded mandates, in terms of money not being used properly. I would rather see those issues dealt with and strengthened than just dump the money and not use it the way it's intended. For the most part, these grants from the federal government especially have been for the children of greatest need, whether you're talking about language, poverty, whatever. And I'm not sure that that money would find the place that it has been going. And I certainly concede the money has not always been used well, but I really have a lot of reservations about block grants.
Joel?
Yeah, it's a very complicated question, so let me answer it briefly because we've got a lot of people who want to ask questions. Look, if you wanted to go to a model of block grants, it would have to be tied to real performance-based accountability. The idea that the federal government can give you all this money, whether you do anything for your kids or not, is nuts. And that's the old Title I model we had. Indeed, the worse your kids did, the more money the federal government gave you. So I would be in favor of setting out real performance goals and saying to cities and school districts, you meet your goals, we give you more money. You don't meet your goals, we cut you off. But I would not just write a blank check and say, have at it.
Okay, since we're not going to have time for each panelist to answer each question, why don't you specify when you ask your question whom you would like to answer it also?
That's going to be difficult, but my name is John Bauer. I'm a consultant in technology and teacher training. My question refers back to the title of the panel.
Oh, that.
We've had, the discussion so far has been about an existential discussion about school boards. But what I'd like to ask the panel to think about, and maybe one or two to respond, if not certainly not all three, is what is the value of local control, and how does that help us to improve education?
Okay, I think Ann should tackle that and Joel should tackle that. Jean, you'll sit this one out.
I think if you are specifically talking about to fuel a global economy, those are the kinds of questions that school board members are asking all the time. And that's why we believe in the Common Core standards, because they are benchmarked to an international, global set of standards. I think it is the question you have to ask around technology and the way we teach. 21st century skills are not the way that a lot of curriculums are built. And in order to be competitive in that global environment, we need our students to be communicating well, problem solvers, analytical thinkers, all the skills that we know are critical in 21st century learning.
Oh.
So those are the questions
Okay.
school board members have to ask.
Joel?
I think we need a national solution. I think the federal government should actually, paradoxically, contrast to many of my friends, I think the federal government needs to actually seize control of this issue. Our competitive future and the kind of people we want to be depend on educating kids to a very, very different level. And so in a world which currently doesn't exist, I would have an entirely different federal role and responsibility in K-12.
So when you come back to Jeb's conference next year, we can talk about the federal role in repairing American education. That's clearly on a lot of people's minds. Go ahead.
Stafford Palmieri from the Governor's Office of Louisiana. My question is actually about logistics. I haven't heard anything about a third way during today's conversation. We have countywide districts, and I'm wondering how you marry the concept of locally controlled education, which I think has been central to the school choice movement and to empowering parents. It's ironic we have another concurrent session about parents mobilizing going on right now, with the issues of how dollars flow on the local level when you have a countywide district. And I guess I'd like to have Joel Klein answer the question, but I'm curious for anyone's thoughts.
Okay. Joel, do you get it, or does Stafford need to restate it?
So again, you know, I believe that when you diffuse authority over key government functions, you make them less accountable, less responsible, and less adaptable. So to me, it's not the size of the unit, it's much more the nature of the governance. And I'm a big believer that we want to hold people accountable, and the more you diffuse authority, the harder it is. So whether it's on a countywide basis or on a citywide or a school district basis, I'm not interested.
So what model would you endorse?
Again,
So in northern Louisiana, for example, the only statewide elected official is the sheriff.
Is the what?
The sheriff.
The sheriff.
And we have a police jury, which is
Countywide, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, you could have it, or you could have the governor. It depends on the structure. In Louisiana, actually, one of the key things they have is a recovery school district, which is doing some of the most remarkable work in America today. You could have it on a statewide basis, you could have it on a citywide basis, but I just want to identify who is the person that's responsible and accountable to the citizenry. And when you diffuse power, I think ultimately it makes it less likely that you get the accountability in the system.
So I'm wondering what kind, and I think my question is probably most pertinent to Anne, what kind of qualifications board directors have, because there's two things that you cited that I think throw that into question. One is, yes, districts are the most common form of authorizer, but they're undoubtedly the least quality form of authorizer.
The least
quality.
Quality?
When you look at NACSA's, the National Association of Charter School Authorizers survey results, they aren't performing the practices in order for them to be able to know what a quality application is. So I don't have any confidence in the fact that you say they turn away ones that are not good. And part of that is because I don't know that they know what to do or how to read data.
Make it a question.
I am. So, what kind of professional development, what kind of board development do they get so that they understand accountability, what it really means, and know how to look at data correctly?
It's a great question, and actually we've gotten a Gates Foundation grant, and over the past 2 years have been developing modules to help school boards really tackle the data issues. You know, the favorite trick, and I can say this because I've talked to a lot of superintendents, is for superintendents to load boards with notebooks of data. But learning how to analyze it and use it for the purposes of student achievement and making decisions is critical. And so state school board associations like the Colorado Association of School Boards and NSBA have been in the past, I'd say 4 to 5 years, really focusing in on this data-driven decision making. So your point is very well taken.
Okay, I believe you were one of the school board members who raised your hand, aren't you?
I am. My name is Bryant. I serve on the Howard County Board of Education in Howard County, Maryland, which is one of the top performing school districts in the nation, the only school district in the state of Maryland that met AYP last year. I have a question, thank you.
And Maryland's standards aren't that high.
Well, according to Education Week, it is the #1 state school system in the nation.
Yeah, right.
As Mark Twain said, there's
I live
lies,
there.
damn lies, and under statistics. But
Go ahead.
My question is for Mr. Klein. I'm an anomaly in the state of Maryland as a conservative Republican, and I look at your statement around the analogy with police and fire and those type of things, and this idea of centralizing more and more power over controls as suggesting that because democracy may be failing in some way in this, that we should take away that democracy, which I think is a dangerous slippery slope if we were to apply it to Congress and everywhere else. But if that's the case, how can you be in favor of having more choice and more flexibility with parent triggers and school choice, which I'm in favor of, but then at the same time, in the same answer, suggesting that we should have less democracy and less flexibility by having more centralization?
Okay, Joel?
So it's a good question. I guess, first of all, it's not a question of more or less democracy. I think by design, ours was a representative democracy. And to me, the fact that you can elect the mayor or elect the county executive and hold him or her accountable seems to me to be the way the system works best. So that's what I think. In terms of things like parent trigger and so forth, it seems, again, in the current system, which we currently have, I think things like parent trigger, empowering the people who are directly affected. These are not people running for anything, but empowering people who are directly affected so that we can get the kind of movement and change in the system works. So it may not be 100% entirely consistent, but I see it as very different between the role of representative democracy and the role of empowerment of the people who are directly affected at the school level in a system in which usually those people have no choice.
Quick, Gene, because
I just want to say someone raised the question about qualifications of school board members. I write in my book this is a real problem, and a lot more has to be done to prepare people for these jobs and have continuing learning in this area. It's no less true for people who sit on the boards of charter schools. This is a real weakness when it comes to governance. People get on the school boards, whether it's a charter school board, public school board, they don't have the slightest idea what governance means or what it means to be a governor. So we need a lot more training.
And you do spell that out in the book, I believe. Go ahead.
My name is Scott Harris. I'm here from Connecticut, and in the Connecticut State Constitution, towns and city councils are prohibited from directing local boards of education to use their money for any particular purpose. I'm not a board of education, but I do sit on the Hamden, Connecticut Legislative Council, which is the city council there, and we cannot even provide money to the Board of Education, additional money for reforms or doing anything like that. My question is that common across the nation to have that kind of dynamic? And if it's not, do you have any examples of city councils and boards of education working together to implement that kind of reform?
The most prevalent form is for school boards to be self-governing, self-financing operations to raise their own money and to spend it. But when you go to other places, including New York City and some states, the money comes and is raised at a different level, even though you have a school board. But what you described is the most prevalent.
Why don't you buttonhole Gene after for some specific examples, maybe, or Ann may have some. Is that okay? Thanks. Next.
Hi, my name is Dave Trarbert. I'm with Kansas Policy Institute. My question is for Ann. It's regarding the relationship between a school board and the superintendent, for example, the administration of the district. I'm interested to hear, it sounds that at the national level, your encouragement is that they should be an oversight. In Kansas, at least, that's completely the opposite. The official position of the Kansas School Board Association is that they're there to support the superintendent and do what the superintendent wants. In fact, they've been told, I've been in the meetings, where they're told kind of stay out of their way. Is it common across the country for school boards, state school board associations, to do things like that and also to jointly lobby and testify with the teachers union?
Those are 6 questions. It is absolutely best practice to talk about a board superintendent team. In most cases, the superintendent reports to the school board, but for purposes of evaluation, that happens. In other words, the board evaluates the superintendent performance based on goals that are mutually set. In terms of responding to the jointly lobbying, it varies in every state. I would say the most common joint lobbying is between superintendents and school boards going to a state legislature over an issue. Sometimes the opinions of the union and especially the school board association dramatically divide. So they do not always jointly lobby their state legislatures.
Does your association have a position on whether they should jointly lobby or not?
We do not, because it varies absolutely by state, and I could give you 50 stories, one for each state.
So this is a states' rights issue for the state associations. All right, patient last questioner.
Hi, Susan Myers with the Friedman Foundation. The title of this talk today is How Can Locally Controlled Education Fuel a Global Economy? And Checker has written about how our country does not compete in the world marketplace. So my question is, since all of us here today are here because of school children and how we cannot compete, our children cannot compete with China and Finland and Korea, Great Britain, and all the countries of the world, especially Western countries of the world, we all know that this model of school boards does not work. And the sentiment in this room and nationally is that big governance doesn't work, let's blow it up. So why aren't school boards saying, let's let the money follow the child? Joel Klein likes the option of school choice. The school boards say they like the option of choice. Then why do they continue to resist allowing money to follow the child, whether it's virtual schools, charter schools, private schools, school choice? And then I'd like Joel to comment on that as well.
Let me just say that school boards are not about big government, because probably at least 40 or 50% of school boards preside over districts, 2,500 students or less. I would hardly call that big government.
And I think one of the most exciting models took place in Seattle, Washington, and that is where the money follows the child. So there are avenues where that sentiment certainly has been promulgated by the school board. I think your assumption that that's an easy fix is also not quite right, and I'd love to talk to you about it after this.
Joel, last word.
I think the money should follow the child. That would be the ultimate in grassroots democracy. Let's empower each family to decide what's best. Today, certainly, there are lots of families that have real choice in America. Most of the families that don't, who get a one-and-done solution, are those families that often have the greatest need for education to transform the lives of their kids. So I think we got it backwards.
I think that's a pretty good last word. I think you're about to be asked for a formal evaluation, but first thank the panel for a terrific show.